Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. It's amazing from all the reading and information that I pour through or I try to on a daily basis. It's just amazing that I come across something and I realize that I have been looking at things completely wrong or, didn't take into account a big portion of the information. And it's really taking place right now in the lumber for me. And I really have to thank one of our viewers, Shane. Now, I would love to tell you where Shane is from, or at least where the email came from, but I don't know if Shane wants to remain, anonymous or not. So I'm just going to have to thank Shane for giving me this perspective, because when I started researching some of the stuff that Shane had talked about in this email, I realized that it made so much more sense to me why lumber prices are the way they are. And just for your information today, just before I started this video, I couldn't believe it. It's the first time I had actually checked lumber prices. I had the day off today, so I haven't been into work or anything. And I just fired up the September contracts to see where the futures were. And right now we are sitting about 60 per thousand down for the day, which is a huge amount. It's the biggest down day I think I've ever seen. It's probably a record in lumber. I think back to like just last week, because I made a call saying that I think lumber prices might be topping out, and then the September contracts continued up into new all-time highs, but the November contracts from that point on were dropping. So even though I thought I was wrong, and I took that video down and made an apology video essentially saying that I'm sorry, I made the call too early, prices don't seem to be topping out. I guess they were topping out. I was right the first time. I should really go with my gut feelings on stuff like this, because it really appears that was the time that they were topping out. They definitely topped out in November on that day, and even though September contracts continued to go up for a little time, like another week or so, they have come down substantially since then. So really, I was calling the top. Anyway, this information that I got from Shane. So the first part of it made a lot of sense. He was like, and it's something that I think a lot of viewers had commented on. And, because I had talked about how these sawmills are not producing the lumber in a quantity that is matching the demand. And I was questioning one of my vendors about it. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, here it is, prices are at all-time high. Why in the world would a sawmill not be producing as much as they possibly could in order to get the top dollar for their lumber? And I said, it just seems so conspiratorial, that these guys would, hold back production in order to keep the prices high so that they can, continue to make a bigger profit off of the same amount of work. At least that's what the kind of the consensus view of a lot of people were. But then Shane mentioned something, and he says, these lumber nowadays, kiln dried is a very popular product. In fact, that's the only thing that the yard that I work for stocks is kiln dried standard and better lumber. And the kiln, if you're not familiar with kiln dried, what that means is that they take lumber and they put it into basically a giant box, which is a big building, and they heat it up, and they get all the moisture, well, as much as they possibly can, which is a fair amount of it, a lot of the moisture out of the board. And the nice thing about this is that your boards won't warp or twist after this. And I don't know if it's the same case across the nation, but definitely up here in the Northwest, we have an issue with mold and mildew. And when you're working with green lumber and you're framing in the middle of winter and you're trying to dry that building in, it's very difficult, because you don't want to just run sheetrock over the top of green lumber, or else you'll have this mold issue and mildew issue building up inside your walls. So you have to dry the house out first before you put the drywall in. And if you use kiln dried lumber, that's, expedites the whole process. So you don't have to, kiln dried lumber is by far the more popular product nowadays. At least that's from the experience that I've gotten. Now, going back to these kilns, you can only put so much material into these kilns, and it takes so long to dry them. So there's a bottleneck taking place in the drying process of the lumber. So you can cut as much as you want, but it takes time, and it's only so big of a facility. Now, you can build more facilities, but that takes time, and by the time you do that, who knows what the prices will be by that point. So That's another reason why the lumber shortage has taken place, is that, during the lockdown, the inventory drop that took place, and all of a sudden the demand for, like, home improvement took place, started sucking up that demand. The inventory levels were too low to meet the demand, and now they can't seem to fill up the inventory levels again, which makes a lot of sense. So there's a bottleneck taking place at those kilns, at the kiln drying part. But then he got to, like, the real nitty gritty of it. The real reason why lumber prices, I feel, are at the prices that they are right now, and why the sawmills are not producing at the rate that would match the demand. And the reason is pulp. Okay, and it was something that I've heard a few commenters, viewers say down in the comments section. They've mentioned pulp, and wood pulp, and this is like the main product for paper products and stuff like that. And I saw a few viewers mention this, and I never really researched it. I didn't really think about it. Now, I did do a video talking about how a Chinese corporation, what was it, like Seven Dragons, I think they called themselves, like SD. Anyway, they were opening up a paper production facility over on the East Coast somewhere. And, I think the title of the video or something back then was like, manufacturing comes back to America, but guess who owns it? It's like China. So I did this video on it talking about paper mills back, quite a few months ago. But I never really did the research on it. And then when I started researching, I realized that it makes a whole lot more sense for the reasoning why lumber prices are the way they are. Because the paper products have had a huge industrial shift. Okay. First off, China would purchase better than 25% of the wood pulp from the United States. So it was a major export for the United States, this wood pulp. Okay. And if there is not a demand for this wood pulp, then the sawmills are going to have an issue. Because the sawmills don't just sell lumber. They sell every bit of part of the tree. There is no waste. They sell the bark, they sell the pulp, they sell the chips, they sell everything, including the lumber. And if they have nothing but a demand for lumber, then the whole rest of their product, there's no market for. And so even though we look at it saying, well, you cut down trees, you can produce the lumber, you're getting top dollar for the lumber, but if you have no place to send your pulp, the rest of the products that you make from the industry, then you're stuck. You're back to oversized amount of inventory. So this is where it's taken place. It's in the pulp. Okay. Now, during the lockdown and everybody started working from home, all of a sudden there was this big demand for tissue. So that is a major boost to the pulp industry. However, with all the lockdown taking place, the shift in the industry from packaging and like tissue, which is like the big part of the industry now, has come from the other side where it was like printing paper and office and stuff like that. So this huge shift from that, working in like at a facility paper needs, over to a shipping and tissue need only, or pretty much booming. And that shift that took place had a huge drop in the pulp demand, especially when China, started instituting like, the tariffs on themselves and exports and, trade wars and everything else that was coming with it. So this pulp industry has seen a huge global demand drop, price issues. There has been as much issues taking place with the pulp industry as there has been with the lumber industry. Now, going back to how this affects lumber, going back to the loggers, right? Because my buddy who's logging, he says, man, it's been the slowest it's ever, he's ever experienced. And I was reading articles about how it's pretty much the same story coming out of Maine. And this is what they are saying, is that, when you look at a logging operation, you're not just getting the saw logs for cutting lumber. You got everything else that goes with it. You got all the biomass. You got all the pulp that's going to come from all the non-saw logs, essentially. right? All the waste that comes from after you saw off the saw logs. There is a lot of products that comes from logging this. So when you go to do a logging operation, you can't just say, hey, just pull out all the saw logs and leave everything else. Everything has to go, and you have to have a place for all of it. And if you don't have a place for all of it, it doesn't make it worthy to cut down the trees. You see what's happening here? When I started thinking about this, it started making so much more sense. And so I started looking into like paper mills, and I found a lot of articles talking, and it's been leading up to this. Like this didn't happen because of COVID. This was like, there was articles that I'm finding about paper mills shutting down from 2019. So this was a lead up coming up to this. In fact, I think it was a 10% drop in pulp exports going to China in 2019, before all the lockdown and everything else took place. So this is the reasonings why we're seeing the lumber industry having the effects that it is from the price, from the prices, due to the sawmills not being able to sell the rest of the product that they have out there, or not having a proper buyer for them, or a convenient buyer, I guess I should say. Anyway, I have a lot of links that I'll leave down in the description for you guys. And I'm going to have to keep pouring over some of this information. I mean, we're seeing, like I said, we're seeing the future prices drop dramatically right now. Production is probably going to start picking up when it comes to Canadian exports or imports coming from Canada. There was a big World Trade Organization decision made where the United States is supposed to stop the duties that it's putting on softwood imports coming from Canada. The United States is saying that it's unfairly subsidized their lumber industry, making the lumber coming into the country disproportionately cheap. Now look at it. 900 per thousand it reached up to. So yeah, I mean, if it was meant to punish Canada, I don't think that happened. They're going to get top dollar for their lumber when they start importing it back into the country, or at least, it's going to be fairly high as the prices come back down to normal. Anyway, found that to be pretty interesting information. Let me see. I don't think there was anything else I wanted to add into that. There probably is. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.